All right, we're live. Who all is here so far? Looks like Andy Wood was in here like 40 minutes ago. Max Wedge, Dick Dastardly, and Wendy English. 38 POS Racing and Auto Salvage Outlaws. Pure Pontiac Garage. Pure Pontiac, our movie choice is just for you, Pontiac people. We got to get you one victory all weekend, right? Tall Garage is here. Unfinished Project. Buff Del Campo. Usually Buff Del Campo comes in second shift. He's already here. NSB Custom Cars. Glad to see you guys. First Responder is here. Hey, look at that. Andrew Nelson's in the chat. Must be Back to the Future. You're in two different places at the same time.
Well, I like following along with the chat.
Bad Attitude C. Tim Blake, who should be joining us at some point. We've got Colleen Tebow, Mohawk 62. Mater's Workshop is here. I'm supposed to be live with Mater Monday night. Bad Tree Productions Blake and Blue Collar Performance. T's Good Time Garage. Dude Mopar. My mom's here. Mopar Al Buck. Well, cool. Good crew in the house. Busted Radio. Wanted to say hi to everybody. Tonight's going to be a little bit different. You know, we had our tech director, Dig Denny, on last week, and we covered, things that are straight from the AHRA rule book and things that we need to do for our cars to pass tech, and all that's understandable. But I figured today we've got some folks in the community who have lived some really interesting experiences when things go wrong on the track. And that directly is affected by your safety equipment directly affects the outcome you're going to have when things go wrong.
Yep.
So we're not memorializing any tragedy here. Just know that I can tell you, I have watched video of Andrew Nelson's wreck even now, knowing what happened, knowing the aftermath, knowing all of that, and it still takes my breath to see that car go over the wall at 150 miles an hour on fire. It's terrifying, especially when you know the person behind the wheel. It's even more terrifying. And so what we want to do is we want to have a live talking about people who've lived through this stuff, how the safety we build into our cars, what it's doing for you, how it might have helped reduce the worst of the aftermath that could have happened. And hopefully those lessons don't get lost that we get from an event like this. So we've got some guests to be on the show tonight. We've got the Nelsons. We've got a couple other guests that should roll in here as the evening goes. But for right now, I'm only going to have a little bit less chat engagement tonight. I'm going to take chat questions, but I'm going to try to keep them germane to the topic at hand. So for now, what I'd like to do is give the floor to the Nelsons. And we want them to tell you a good story and what all got learned and so forth. Guys?
Sure. Yeah. Well, good evening. I'm Andrew. This is my son, Calvin. And we're honored that you'll give your Friday night to listening to us chit-chat with you guys. We really enjoy this community, and we thank you that we have the privilege to be part of it and get to share some of our experiences, even when they're bad experiences.
Yep.
So...
You'll start off with your history in racing.
Yeah, I've been racing my whole life. I've been involved with the sport since I was 13 years old, and I started going to the track. I was heavily involved in an old pro stock car that was converted to a bracket car. Had the privilege to work on a team that was a competitive team in Comp Eliminator when I was 16, 17 years old. Had my own program developed from that. And in 43 years of racing, I've done over 10,000 passes on the track. We kind of lost track of it a number of years ago. And the reality of having done it so long can creep into the thought that things won't happen to you, and that's always a risk. Ultimately, because of how much racing that we do and the different variety of racing that we do, each of the sanctioning bodies have uh, practices that came from bad incidences. As they mentioned the other day with Deke and Dallas, every rule's written in blood, and that's a fact. And fortunately for myself and for Calvin, some of the things that I learned land speed racing have become my norm. Double checking your helmet strap, the um, Hans device, double checking that the bar seat belts are drawn tight just before I take off. And the subject tonight is the aftermath, and what do we take away from that? And I'm so grateful that in the land speed racing that I've done, those habits of rechecking everything before you even pull into the line and get ready to make your pass is something that's so habitual that I remember just before the pass going through my standard routine: check, 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 pull, tug, and making sure everything was tight. And it certainly put the odds in my favor to survive the incident.
Hey, Andrew, for those who are new here, because we do have a lot of folks who are new to things and they might not know about what happened in February. So if you would tell them, where you were, what you were driving, and just kind of take that story from the top so they can get an idea on what happened coming into that event and that fateful pass.
I can do that. Well, we got done. I'm trying to remember what happened just before October 10th.
So
October 11th.
we got done with the No Name Nationals last year.
It was the No Name Nationals. That's
and
right.
We had already signed up for Sick Week. Just before we got to the No Name Nationals, the Sick Week signups were. And we got into Sick Week. And we started talking about, on our way home from the No Name Nationals, what are we doing for Sick Week? And we kind of were tossing around ideas. Oh, let's take the Fairmont. Let's take the, this car, that car, this car. And then all of a sudden, we were scrapping a Trailblazer, actually, because we had just pulled the engine out of it. And we saw this little red car that was sitting in the junkyard when we were scrapping the Trailblazer. And I'm trying to bring up a picture here for you. And this little red car, I thought it was an old Ford, but it turned out it was a 1959 Volvo PV 544 that we picked up for $600 out of the scrapyard. And the reason that I was so interested in this car is it was a smaller car. It was built in the 50s with the construction style that you would see in that era of car, which means that it doesn't weigh a lot. And it's a unit body construction, which most cars of that era, you would see a body on frame. And I started doing research on it and found these things are crazy light from the factory. So we picked up this car it was October 11th, I believe, of 2022.
Yep.
And we started building it for the event, which started on February 11th of 2023. So that gave us almost exactly 4 months to build the car.
122 days.
Yep. So we started building this thing, and my initial thoughts of the car is this thing is so light, it's going to be really, really hard to go slow with that little weight. There's, just about anything we do these days is, we're in excess of 600 horsepower with almost everything we do. I wanted a picture of it. I just can't find it.
Yeah,
But
right there.
yeah, there we go. So it was literally sitting right next to the Crusher. I thought it was a lot of people would mistake it for a Volkswagen, but no, it's a Volvo. And so when we were starting the build on the car, one of the first things that we discussed was the roll cage, because it was. I was thinking this car is going to probably be 24 to 2,600 pounds when we're done with it, and 600 horsepower with that little bit of weight is going to be pretty fast. So we started laying out the roll cage, and it was like, we need to put a funny car style cage in the thing. So we started working on that almost immediately. And we decided to go for a much higher level cage than what we really would want to do with the car. We decided to go with a 650 cert, just because a few extra bars and you're good for a 650 in the quarter mile.
I'll note that he's not saying this retroactively. I remember their videos, they were mentioning this all along the build.
Yep. So there's the car when we got it onto the ground on all fours for the first time. And we decided to do a Vortec 4200 swap into the thing, just because that's kind of our thing. And worked with a couple of our sponsors to get Go Fast parts for it. And we got the thing done in time. And we took it to Sick Week. We got some dyno testing. We got like a couple street miles on the thing. And it was like, all right, time to go to Sick Week. So we made it to Sick Week, made it through day one, and it was pretty much smooth sailing. And our whole philosophy with the event is we're not going to try and win anything. We're not going to try and go sixes on the first pass. Our goal was to make a pass on the wastegate spring, and then just gradually turn the thing up over time. I think something that some people do that's a little bit irresponsible is they try to go for the gusto on the very first pass, and you don't even know if it's gonna, you don't even know if it's gonna hook to the track and be able to go. They just want to put 40 pounds of boost to it on the first pass, and so we were just gonna slowly inch our way up, and unfortunately. We got through day one, day two, and on day three, the car didn't really start very good in the morning, which was odd. It had been having issues starting, but I think it was particularly bad on the third day.
The first day we noticed the problem.
Yeah.
Because when we had unloaded, we stayed at a friend's house and we unloaded, and the car had a hard time starting, and very quickly took a coil out. And unfortunately, we did not realize that was an indicator. The type coils that we had that we were using could not handle any kind of upset condition inside the combustion chamber. So we fixed that and didn't pay much attention to it, because the car ran great as soon as we threw the coil on it at it, and we just assumed that was a one and done deal.
Yeah, we almost called it quits day one because we kept burning up ignition coils, and then we'd put a new ignition coil on it, and it would fire right back up, and be firing again on that cylinder number two. It kept doing it on cylinder number two. And we almost, we had a really late night the first day. We almost called it quits, but we made a call out for some help, and got some LS coils to convert the car to, which is more traditional coil on what you'd see on a more tame race car. And for the amount of power that we were making, that was more than up to the task. So we made it into day three, and I think my dad was talking about his built-in procedure. I remember sticking my head in the door and just saying, be safe, and telling Dad I loved him. And unfortunately, the car had a beautiful pass right up until right before the finish line, and that is where that happened. So that is rod number 2. And it exited the block. This is the chunk of the block that it blew in the side. And from there, it went into a tumble. It made a very hard turn towards the left.
Took the tire out.
The debris, this and the other chunks that exited the block, poked a hole in the tire. And it made a very hard left turn because of that, and it went into a tumble, and it went over the wall. This is actually a chunk of the rear wheel. It hit the back end of the car, hit the ground so hard that it just, you can see the shocks in the back of the car, like they got a decent bend to them just because it took a pretty significant impact. The whole back half of the car is just folded up. And, one of our philosophies with building a car is, a lot of cars you see, there's just tubes going up from end to end, and they make everything super rigid. But we like to build it, with a crash structure, something that can absorb some of the energy. So the tail end of the car, the down bars in the back come down, and then they connect to the rear frame section. But it's not like this big tubular structure. It's something that's designed to, buckle. And, just like you see in a modern car, we want this thing to fold up and take the energy. And it did its job. The car, unfortunately, the fuel tank didn't fare so well, so it caught on fire. That's the license plate.
Wow.
And but luckily the cage did its job. I did every single weld on that cage, and none of them cracked, broke. A couple of the bars were they buckled and collapsed, but none of the welds broke, and everything did its job. Not to say that we're perfect. There's definitely some things that we would have done differently. And certainly, the only way to test out if you're a good welder, unfortunately, is to
Prove it.
prove it. And, we found out that one of the things that we learned from that day is that I could weld. But, there's a few things we would have done differently, such as the seat was a bit of a compromise. We sort of built the cage and then put the seat in the cage. And we should have built the cage around the seat. And because of that, the seat had to be the support that holds the driver's chest. We had to cut it down some to make room for the driver's arm to get to the shifter. And that's probably why my dad broke his ribs. And I guess we should probably talk about Dad. He lost consciousness. Maybe you take the story from here, or
Yeah. I'm going to back up just a second, talk a little bit more about the build. One of the challenges of working full time, both of us, is time's a premium, as it is for all you guys, and we've developed a lot of very good habits in the shop that I want to highlight, because there are certainly things that your habits in the garage, most races are won in the garage, not out on the track. And anybody who's been involved for a long period of time knows that. And the survivability of a crash is also born in the efforts that you put in the shop. So, I would bend the tubing and fit it, and then Calvin would do all the welding, and we were able to balance our time to do that. But one of the many habits that we have through the course of all builds is that there are certain components that get mounted permanent when they go on. Wheels get torqued. Certain elements like that, that if you aren't 100% on, could lead to a very serious situation, are things we never compromise on. And it's funny to look back at videos, because we used to shoot home videos, and both the boys were very, very young when they learned how to use a torque wrench and how to assemble things, and that the expectations were put it on correctly and go to the nth degree of making sure that it's right. So, fast forward to what we went through, the first event that we went to, the first race that we went to, on very low boost, the car ran 130 miles an hour right out of the trailer. And
missing. You missed the first shift.
No. What happened was, the shifter is a forward pattern shifter mounted backwards. And if you don't put your fingers in the perfect spot, you don't pull it to the next gear effectively or efficiently. So you have to go fishing for the lever. And so I ended up in second gear longer than I thought I would be. And when I went into third gear, I was concerned that I had gone into neutral, so I dropped it back into second gear and just ran it out. So the second day, I learned how to put my fingers in the shifter in a certain spot in the shifter, so that I could just pull and it would go through the gears without issue. And that was, a 929 at 137, I think.
930 something. No, you're right.
929,
yeah. You're right.
And the crash was the next day, the third day, and we had gone a 912 at 149.27 miles an hour. And everything on that pass, I remember very vividly. One of the realities of very fast cars is they're very smooth. So you have no sense of speed when you get up to speed. And ultimately, we were going through the traps at 149 miles an hour when the engine just absolutely erupted. So I see the question, would a diaper have saved it? It's always possible, but we had a belly pan on it, and the oil got past that. The oil was all over everything under the car, but at 149 miles an hour with only 3 tires working, the car is going to change direction. And when you consider how short the wheelbase was, how narrow the track was, and how high the center of gravity was, when that tire went down, it yaw rotated the car fast enough that it started to roll rotate the car immediately. And as the engine was starting to come apart, coming through the traps, I was already starting to go up for the parachute, because I was going to release it because the engine was coming apart. And, the car was so smooth, I had not thought about doing that because it was just riding along very happy, very comfortable, very smooth. I had no sense of how fast I was going. But when the engine started coming apart, it was like, okay, I got to get this thing stopped. And some of the top end pictures, you can see my hand going up in the air for the parachute release. And before I could get onto the parachute, the tire went down, and I felt the tire go, and I felt the car get upset and start to roll rotate as it was yaw rotating. And because of the high center of gravity, it started to barrel roll until it hit the wall backwards and then pole vaulted itself over the wall. And so that's the simple question, or simple answer to your question is, we don't know. What we do know is that had that been on there, or had the belly pan caught the debris from the engine, anybody who's raced long enough has driven on oil. Anybody who lives in the Northeast has driven on ice. I'm very comfortable in both of those scenarios. But trying to drive on oil with a missing tire, is certainly stacking the odds against you. And when the car made the radical turn, then I was along for the ride, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazingly, the engine was still running when it went into the roll. I have data, and the engine was still doing its thing. The laptop that was in the passenger seat, another takeaway. The laptop was sitting in the passenger seat. I had it seat belted in, but obviously not very tight because it came loose, and it ended up above the driver funny car cage, and it was crushed in between the roof and the over top of the funny car cage. And I was able to pull the data off of that computer, and I found that pretty much until the point that it came unplugged, the engine was still running. So, it's not like it locked the engine up and then that locked the rear tires up. That was one of our theories. It definitely did not do that because I have data. But yeah, from there,
we know when the car started to turn and head into the barrel roll, because I remember going up and over. I remember being upside down, sliding on the roof, and everything all of a sudden went violent. And then when the car went into the wall backwards, which is what balled everything up and launched the car vertical, is when I lost consciousness. The back tires were locked up. Ultimately, when the car turned, and I could, as the car is progressing forward and changing direction, all I could see was the guy in the other lane. His parachute was in front of me, and I did not want to hit him. So, I'm putting brakes on harder as the car's continuing to move. And being that it was on oil, plus one tire was gone. That's ultimately what would have led to the back tires being locked up. So the people viewing the whole incident from the top end saw what was going on, but ultimately it was oil, hard braking, and those cars also have a very high lift characteristic at speed. It was interesting that while we were there, the Swedish, this event, both Drag Week and Six Week, attract people from all over the world. And we probably had, I'm going to say 40 to 50 Swedes come up to us and say, you need to get a wing on that. You need to get a wing on that. And we heard that multiple times. And it's no doubt in my mind that as the car pitch rotated forward on the deceleration, that only exacerbated the amount of lift that the back end of the car saw. And it's on oil, and it's got a missing tire. So the back end locks up. It's already yaw rotated, heading towards the wall, and that's a combination that led to the crash.
That brings up an interesting question. So we know you were obviously in the car, and Calvin was filming it, and Calvin had remarkable composure considering what you're watching while you're filming it. I mean, watching that still disturbs me slightly watching that now.
No, it does me too.
I mean, it's really something to see a friend of yours in a wreck that you don't know if he survived or not. Now, fortunately, Ryan Wing had told me, I think he told me about it right before, so I actually knew that you survived it before I watched the wreck. I'm glad I knew that. If I'd been watching it live, it might have fallen over. But then I get an update very shortly after it happened from Mrs. Nelson, and I appreciated that very much because I'm in limbo. I don't know what's going on, but I appreciated that very much. That's a hard thing to watch.
Yep.
So my question is for you, Mrs. Nelson. What do you think when you see something when you know this is a dangerous hobby and dangerous sport?
Yes, it's always been in the back of my mind, but he's been racing for a long, long time that I never thought, I never even thought that it was going to happen, let alone, there. And
Yeah, you can always think it could happen to somebody else, but you never think it could happen to you or somebody close to you. It's
But I, in my mind when it happened, I never thought for a moment that, that he died or, I just thought, well, he flipped a couple times and the engine blew up and I think he'll be all right. That's just what you think. Because I was filming him too when I was right behind Calvin the when he went down the track and I just saw all the smoke. I looked up from my camera and I saw all the smoke and I was like, oh my God, what just happened? And at that moment, I lost track of Calvin. I didn't know where he got to.
Yep.
And so instead of running down the track, I hopped over the cement barrier and ran in the grass because I didn't want to fall. I knew how sticky the track can get. So I didn't want to become an injured person as well. And I was like, I got to get down there. I got to see how he is, and maybe I can help him. And so when I got down there, they were like, well, you can't go over there. And I'm like, yes, I need to get over there. What's going on? And I said, I'm on his way. And then a minute passed and the one guy came back and he says, okay, this is what's going on. He has a concussion. He's going to repeat things. And then I saw him in the car and I saw what the car looked like and it was just horrific. There's no glass on the windshield and it's just a carcass and he's sitting in it and he's spouting off and he's talking and
what was the first thing he asked you?
The first thing he asked me was, "What's that?"
I remember that.
No, and I'm like staring at him, and I'm like, what? I don't know. I just was like, okay, he's okay. Yes, he's okay, but
if I had seen that wreck, if I'd seen that car, I would never have thought anybody survived that wreck.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thought. I thought he was dead. Like that was like I saw the whole thing happen and I'm like, yep, he's probably dead. And they took so long to announce it. That was really hard. And my mom, she just disappeared. I wanted to, be with her, and I'm like, where the heck did she go?
What?
And she had hopped over the guard. I looked down the track. I'm like, well, she's not running down the track. Where the heck did she go? And little did I know, she's off on the side. Like if I would have just looked a couple feet to the right, I would have seen her. But so I started looking for emergency people. I was like, I'm gonna hitch a ride or something because I don't want to get in the way. That's the one thing that was in my mind. It's like I don't want to get in the way. They need to do their job. But if I could just hitch a ride and just know if he's okay, that's all I need. And they just took so long. It was just silence, for such a long time. And so after a while, I went up to somebody at the starting line and I'm like, hey, that was my dad. Would one of you mind taking me down to the to the finish line so that I can just see if he's okay? And so one of them took me down, and I get to the ticket booth, and there's this little lady, and she's arms crossed. She's like, no, turn around. She's shouting at us. She's just like, you are not going down there to film. She's like, turn to anybody that wants to go down there. She's like, no, turn around. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's my dad. I'd like to go see him. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And so she let us go past. And then I met up with Mom, and found out that he was okay. And, I pretty much, I came up to the car and he was getting ready to get loaded on the stretcher. And he was just like, "I'm okay, buddy. I'm okay." And I could see he was okay. I could tell he was, they lifted him into the ambulance, and I could tell he was like going into shock or something. And from there it was like, all right, I started trying to figure out what happened, and just taking pictures, even though I didn't want to take any pictures. I couldn't believe it happened. But I was like, oh, I got to take pictures. We got to learn something from this. And, frankly, I wish I had taken more, just because, I think we have a pretty clear picture of what happened, but, I wish I had taken more. There were certain things like the windshield was all broken and smashed and on the ground, all in one piece. And it, had the Sick Week 2023 across the top. And I couldn't bring myself to take a picture of that just because it hurt too much. And the whole like front grille, like all the trim and the headlight rings and everything was like smashed into the ground, like it had just made a face print into the ground. And luckily Keith Turk was there at the end of the drag strip, and he gave me a big hug, and that was much appreciated. But
he gave me a big hug too, and
yeah.
I really appreciated that.
But we should probably talk about what kind of injuries Dad walked away with.
Oh, well.
I'm done with my turn. Yes, your turn. I'm done telling my sob story.
No, it's the truth of that issue is not knowing. And the agony that they went through was very real. And anybody who knows us knows that we're very close, but we also tease each other and carry on. And, when we're reciting the story about what happened, I've teased them with, I'm coming to still in the car, and I'm hearing this woman scream, "Do not resuscitate, do not resuscitate." And, first few times you say that, people are mortified, but then they realize, this was a very bad situation, but we can't be scared of life. We can't be scared of what happened. This was very severe. I broke a backbone. I broke 4 ribs, severely bruised the lung. Injured my eyes, extremely bad concussion. My hip is still bothering me, and I'm still having problems with my hip. The shoulder, after a very major surgery, and the surgeon rated this a 9 out of 10 for severity. He gives me a 50-50 chance of getting 80% of the use of the arm, of the shoulder, which, statistically sounds pretty horrible, but considering how violent this accident was, there's a reason why certain race sanctioning bodies require that you have arm restraints. And in hindsight, I don't know if I would have had those on, but I definitely would not have. We would have mounted the seat and then built the cage. And we didn't do that. That was a lesson learned.
That's a good place to get off talking about. So hindsight, of course, is everything, right? What would you guys have done differently with? I mean, obviously, you don't build for a wreck, or you wouldn't go, right? I mean, that's obvious. But what would you do differently? You've gotten to deconstruct it. You've had some time to think about it. If you were building a car like that again from scratch, what would you do differently?
So we would not have built that car.
Right.
Because there are a lot of things about that car, and it's kind of funny because I've had probably 50 people send me links to Volvos, because they want us to build another one. And
I've actually had people send me links to them and say, "Hey, send this to Calvin and Andrew." I really have.
Yeah, another funny one was somebody sent me a link to a Beetle, and I'm like, it's not a Beetle. But So yeah, there's been a lot of people that have reached out. I appreciate where their heart is. They're just trying to help. I'm not upset about it. It's I get it. It's they just want to try and lessen the pain. But we would not have built that car. The problem is, again, like I said, it weighs so little, so it's hard to make it slow. And so that's one problem, because that's not really a problem, but because of that, the car has pretty poor characteristics that make it not great for something that you want to go fast in. That it's very narrow, so it's going to want to tip over. It's very tall, so it's going to want to tip over. It's very short, so it's going to want to turn. And all of those things are not what you want on a drag car. So the solution would have been, don't build that car. Build something that is wider, lower, and longer. Which that's pretty much going to be what we do in the future. You think about, I think it's 2 feet narrower in track width than like a Fox body Mustang. I think that's what we measured.
It's over a foot. It's
I thought it was close to
16 inches.
Okay, so a foot, basically a foot and a half narrower than a Fox body Mustang, and those are already pretty narrow.
It's that much narrower than a Fox-bodied Mustang?
Yep.
Yeah, we're
gosh.
Yeah, with the strut front end, tucking the wheels up in so that they fit within the fenders, exasperated that. It made it that the whole width from outside to outside of the wheel track was 48 inches.
Yeah. If we were building a show car, that thing was sick.
It stopped everybody in their tracks as they were walking past the car.
Tom Bailey was like one of the people that just could not walk past the car. He was like, "This thing's cool."
Yeah. And we put a lot of energy into, one, making it safe, and two, just all the fabrication work. So it made it a standout for what people wanted to see, because we made every effort to make the outside of the car as it came out of the junkyard. And but getting back to your question, obviously, the seat issue was a big thing, not picking that car. But some of the other things that we learned about was crash pads for the seat. There's a point in time where your selection on the seat material has to change, and then at 150 miles an hour and above, they sell what's called a crash pad, which is basically an absorber that decelerates your body in a situation where you're going through high G deceleration, and ultimately not having that led to the compression on my back that caused my vertebrae to break. That is a painful thing to go through, is to have a broken vertebrae. You can't breathe without being in agony. Compound that with the broken ribs because of the seat not having proper containment. It turns out, with the way that the seat was mounted and the way that it moved, and how we had everything in there, we've made a decision that any of our fast cars are going to have full containment seats. The same injury that took Kurt Busch out of NASCAR is the injury that I had. The same injury that Steve Park got when he broke his hip, his femur did break, mine did not, but I have the bruising that's very similar to his injury. And unfortunately for most people, you don't learn these lessons until after you've gone through the trials that we've gone through because of this. And that's where, this invitation to share that lesson learned is so valuable. We want to be upfront with everybody and say, okay, these are our mistakes. Please don't duplicate these things. And we can only hope that, we've been contacted by probably in excess of 100 people already, how they've changed their program, changed things. And my hope is that everybody on here that has anything questionable has heard what we said, and we pointed ourselves. We made decisions, and those decisions had consequences. And if you have anything that you have a doubt about, you're in control. Change it. Do it right. Get the right lug nuts. The big topic the other night. Guys, the only thing touching the road is those tires. And when you lose a tire, I'm living proof of how severe that consequence is of things not going your way.
My goodness. You know what? I would love to, at some point in the future, I do want to have you guys on again. And we'll open up for questions here in a bit, but no pun intended. We're going to shift gears to John Cope. In the chat, if you have any questions, we'll get your questions all at the end, but we've got Cope waiting. We're going to bring him in now. And you guys certainly hang around and participate. We're just going to add John Cope.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
You guys know John Cope? I'm actually, coincidentally, I'm wearing the Mr. Haney shirt today, and I didn't plan that, but it just worked out that way.
So we're Twinkies.
That's it. But of course, the theme today is, since you're just joining us, I've told everybody in the chat today's a little bit different, a little bit less chat engagement. I will pop up questions and comments that are germane to what you're going to talk about, but I wanted people to hear why we care about the tech inspection that we do and why we work so hard throughout the season helping people get to pass tech and why these things matter. And when there are people in our own community that have experiences that they've lived through what these rules are written about, and that's what this is about. So I'm going to turn the floor over to John Cope, and I want you to tell people about your experience. Was it 1991 with the Coronet?
It was either 90 or 91, yes.
Okay. I want you to tell them about that, but just in general, that thing, what happened, the things that get learned and so forth, and what the takeaways are today, why it won't happen to you again and so forth. And the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, John, and hello to the Nelsons. I'm glad that all you guys are okay. I seen those pictures of your car bopping around on social media in the drag racing community, so I'm glad everybody's okay.
Thanks.
Like John said, my story was probably 1991 or 1990, and it was at my first transmission shop in Calumet City, Illinois. And in 1988, I bought my 68 Coronet and put a big block in it with a 727. And at this time, I was a little bit of a street squirrel. I was kind of wanting to put a car together to do some street racing, which was really big in that era on the south side of Chicago. So I probably was, I would say, maybe a mid-12 second car, nothing super fast. But what happened one day, I went out with a couple friends to do some testing before we were going to go to Osceola, and that was going to be my very first trip down the track. And we went out, and I was doing some dry hops, and I should let everybody know that the car did have a reverse manual valve body, 727 with a bolt-in sprag, a cheetah valve body that had no low band apply, and I didn't have any safety equipment as far as a shield. Or I did have a drive shaft loop. I did have some good axle studs. But in the 90s, there really was no low band apply, and there was no billet drums like we have today. So keep that in mind when you listen to the story.
You had a car that passed tech.
Yes.
The car did pass tech, though.
Yeah, because you didn't need a shield at that ET, a transmission shield. So I was on the street when this happened. This did not happen at a racetrack. This happened on the street. I'm just making little test hits, testing first, second, third gear behind a shopping mall where I grew up. And I was using the factory shifter, and I always had a problem pressing the button on a 68 Coronet that center button, pressing the button, and then getting second gear. So I filed out the little gate. So all I had to do was pull it straight back, then press the button to get third. And I was doing a burnout, and I was in second gear, and I went to go grab the shifter, and instead of my eyes weren't on it, I was looking at the horizon, and I accidentally bumped the shifter up into neutral during a burnout. And as a bad, inexperienced driver, instead of letting off the throttle and just aborting, I freaked and I pulled it back down in the gear. So initially, I neutral dropped it during a burnout. And then I actually finished the burnout, and then I come to a dead stop, put it in neutral, cracked the motor, put it in first gear, and I went to the floor, and the transmission exploded. The car just barely moved. It came through the floorboard. It moved the floorboard so bad that it actually took the gas pedal and peeled it over the brake pedal. I mean, it was catastrophic. And I had jumped out of the door while the car was still just barely rolling a little bit. There's a picture.
Yeah, it bent the gas pedal over and peeled the floor pan open when the drum came through the floor. Remember, his foot was on that pedal.
So
it got moved over like that.
Yep. The inside of the car was engulfed in flames. So I opened the door and kind of jumped out while the car was just barely rolling. And since it was transmission fluid that had ignited on the header, it went out really quick. So I jumped in the car, shut it off, and everybody's standing around looking at the car. There's transmission fluid and parts everywhere. And my friend Nicky was goofing around. He goes, "Look, you got transmission fluid all over your foot." Which it wasn't transmission fluid. It was blood. So I'm like, I can feel that I'm hurt. I mean, even though I'm standing up on my own 2 feet, I can feel that I'm hurt. I took my shoe off, I took my sock off, and I had 2 toes that were just like dangling a little bit. So I put my sock back on, and I says, well, someone's got to take me to the hospital. And so one of my buddies took me to the hospital, St. Margaret's in Indiana, which is where I was born. And the other buddy went and got a tow truck and towed my car back. So I'm in the emergency room, and my foot's there, and the doctors are walking back and forth inside the emergency room. They're like, "Were you involved in a shooting?" I'm like, "No." The transmission in my car blew up, and the 2 doctors would walk out. They would walk back in, and they're like, "Okay, what gun happened to this?" I'm like, "Look it, this was not a gun incident. I was street racing or testing, and the transmission in my car blew up." And they're like, "Just exactly how does that happen?" I'm like, "I don't know. This is the first time for me too." So they left the room. Then they came back in again. They're like, "Well, if you don't come clean, we're going to call the police." I said, "Listen, man, I'm telling you what happened." And I go ask my friend who's out in the waiting room. They'll tell you, they'll confirm it. This is not a shooting accident.
This
So
was before
finally
you
I
had
convinced-
cameras. You couldn't just snap all this on your cell phone and show them like you could today.
Right.
This
I
was
did.
before
Yeah,
that.
there was no cell phone. So finally, I convinced them that everything was okay. And they're like, the last time they walked in, they're like, "We don't know if we can save those toes." I says, "Well, listen," I go, either you do or you don't. If you can't, then cut them off. I says, "I don't want to come back here in 4 months with gangrene and come to find out you got to cut my ankle off." You know, I mean, what was I, 24 when this happened? I was still a young man. So before they can do that, they're like, "Well, we have to x-ray your foot." Well, then they found 3 broken bones in my foot. So they sewed the stitches on, and then I recovered for like 2 days. Then they put a cast on, and they finally released me. The first place I went was to Southeast Automotive in Calumet City, and I had to look at the damage, and I could not believe it. Because when I looked in it, when it happened, it was still superficial. It still was not happening, and it was dark out. It was at night, so I really couldn't see the extent of the damage. Then we lifted the car up in the air, and we saw the clutches hanging with no drum on the input shaft.
Gosh.
So for me, it was a lesson learned. Now, I see you ask the Nelsons, what would you do differently? This was in the 90s, so there really was nothing. I mean, yeah, I could have put a shield on it because they were available at that time. But when you're first getting into it, the last thing you're worried about is, hey, how safe can I make the car? It's how fast can I make the car? So in hindsight, I probably would at least put a shield on it or a blanket. And that probably would have been fine.
I should know too. You said you had a bolt-in sprag in that.
I did, John, but I'll tell you that the bolt-in sprag, believe it or not, is almost a sense of false safety, because the spring and rollers is what goes out first. And then when they wad up in the case, then the outer cam spins in the case. So it kept the case from not spinning, the cam in the case. But once the spring and rollers wad up, the power is not going out to the drive shaft anymore. It's taking the transmission and put it on a free rev. So as we all know, we've all had our shop teachers say, don't take compressed air and spin a bearing because there's no load on it. It's just free revving. Well, that's what happens to drums. It was just on a free rev, because that drum, when it's loaded and pushing the car down the track, is going the same RPM, but it's not going as fast because it's loaded. There's a preload on it. But that was the only transmission I ever had explode in my entire career. I've never had it happen to a customer, because after that, I kind of educated myself a little bit, and I still didn't run a valve body with low band apply because they weren't out yet. But later on, about 6 or 7 years later, I started designing valve bodies, and that's how come I make my own valve bodies now. And what's the question down there, John?
A Cove has a relevant question, and he says, with a manual, like a manual transmission, other than a scatter bell housing, what would you recommend? You can reformat that to any transmission. What are your recommendations for shielding the transmission against catastrophe?
In today's world, okay, the best thing you can do on any kind of car that you have, of any make, any model, is, but especially a Chrysler, is put a billet steel drum in it. That is the part that will explode. So even if, let's say it's a street car and it's your daily driver, and you go use it to get ice cream, but it's making 600 horsepower, and you don't need to put a shield on it or a blanket to pass tech because it's a street car, then the billet drum is the best protection. But as far as drag racing is concerned, I recommend the drag sprag that's got more elements. Yes, it is bolt-in. The billet drum, a valve body with low band apply, and some kind of a safety device, if it be a shield or a blanket.
For those in the chat who might not be familiar with low band apply, your first gear, your torque flight transmission, 727, 904, 48RE, all of those, he uses a band in first gear manual, but doesn't in drive position. So your valve body and other manual valve bodies, some of them, not all, but yours all do, applies that band anytime the transmission is in first gear.
That is correct. Matter of fact,
go
ahead, John.
I was going to say, in addition to the sprag, you also have the band holding, which helps prevent that problem.
Yes, that is correct, John. the two work together. It's like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but the band helps the sprag do its job, and it's like making it twice as strong. If it was just out there, the sprag doing all the holding. It's like, a guy pushing a car. It's always better if there's two guys pushing, because you're spreading that equally between two things. Same with the tranny. The sprag and the band are actually working together instead of the sprag working by itself.
One thing, too, that I'll plug real quick, there is a popular video on the Cope Racing Transmissions channel. The thumbnail says, I think it's Transmission Explosions. The
Yep.
video is close to a year old, but it's on his channel. Can't miss the thumbnail if you sort through. In fact, I'll try to remember after this live to put a link to it, but it explains the science of what makes the drum explode. Because people talk about the sprag, the bolt-in sprag, but if you would, why don't you tell them what actually causes the drum to explode?
It's kind of, I was taught before by someone and he used great terminology, so I'm going to use that terminology. It's a domino effect. You can talk to racers that are older than me that be like, I've been racing my whole life. I've never had low band apply, and I've never had a transmission explosion, which that's great. But really, every time you make another pass on the track, your odds become less and less. How it happens is it's what we call the domino effect. One thing has to happen for the next two things to come into play. First, you got to have a transmission that has at least a stock drum, otherwise it'll never explode. So let's say you got a stock drum 727 with a valve body and no low band apply. Usually it's either driver error or when the tires are spinning in first gear, then hooking, or like I did, I accidentally did a neutral drop. Or just repeatedly being really hard on the transmission in first gear, the sprag breaks, okay? So the sprag's job is to hold in the power and transfer it back out through the drive shaft. Well, once that breaks, the power is still coming in from the engine, but it can't put it out to the drive shaft. So all that energy just spins. And the drums that Chrysler made, they were never intended to spin at such a high rate. And when you break a sprag, those drums have been spun tested to fail about 92 to 9,500 RPMs. Now, when you do the math and you take the 245 gear ratio by 5,000 RPMs, you've already exceeded 10,000 RPMs in the drum revolution. So it just cannot take that RPM. The billet drums have been tested up to 30,000 RPMs. And I don't know anybody that can spin it that high. So,
Andrew has a question about that.
Well, I wanted to make a statement. John, you made a very, very important point. Two things line up, and that's when catastrophe happens. For yourself, you described what you went through, and through that process and what you said a minute ago, when two things line up, the catastrophe happens. Same thing happened to me. Engine failure, lost a tire. When you start lining things up and we look at everything singularly, typically we can't recognize the potential for these risks. And the question has to be, did we put ourselves in a good position by having all the safety equipment and all of the devices that we need to protect ourselves? Because without two failures, a lot of times these things don't happen. And I really appreciated that you made that comment earlier, because it's such a critical point, because we all think we're invincible. When we were young, my favorite car in the world is a 68 Corvette. I love hearing, you talk about that thing. It's my car that I want to get someday. The reality of your youth, you thought you were invincible. I've been down the track so many times, I never thought it could happen to me. But when two things line up, that's that's the challenge. Do we have in place our safeguards that are going to protect
Yeah.
us?
Yeah,
Well, I was very young, and here again,
Car. By the way,
I-
this is what it looked like when that happened.
I was very young, and I was not. My goals and everything was to do two things with the car. To once I paint it, make it look killer, big fat tires, jack it up, and the other thing, man, I had a one-track mind. I wanted to go fast, so I would spend my money on go fast stuff. Bigger cams, bigger motor, more converter, more gear, and um, after that, I had two friends visit me in the hospital. See, I was supposed to go to a drag strip the next day, and I had two friends come and visit me in the hospital after they got back from the track. And one of them's still a good friend of mine, Bo Mendez. They both told me, they're like, no more screwing around in the street. He goes, when you get better, we're going to get a cage in the car, we're going to paint it, and then you're going bracket racing with us. And that's exactly what happened. We put a cage in it. We put the safety equipment on it. There was a rash of trans blankets and safety equipment in the Chicagoland area that still is legendary today. I was told by White's Pit Stop, who I was sponsored by at that time, that they never seen so many people walking in and buying transmission shields and blankets. So, I mean, it was a good thing that my friends were kind enough to tell me to quit screwing around on the street and take racing seriously. And when you go to the track and you're around other bracket racers, safety becomes a priority. It really does. Dual springs on the carburetor return. All the things that Deke talked about not too long ago on this program. And it's the little things. I mean, it's already bad enough. You never know when something bad's going to happen. Like at our local track, a deer ran out in front of a guy. I mean, or if a tire flies off someone else's car or a hood, there is some risk in what we do, and I accept that. But it is up to us individually to maybe teach the younger people that it's more than just going fast. You do have to be safe at the same time.
Yeah, and I thought something interesting about what you said. You said you weren't running a trans shield, and because it wasn't required. And I was in a similar boat with my station wagon. I went to the sick week with my dad, and he drove the Volvo, and I drove my station wagon. And something that I think is good to stress on this podcast is just because your car passes tech doesn't necessarily mean it's going to protect you. My wagon meets the letter of the law, and it has a bench. It had a bench seat in the car, and I've been faster in my station wagon than what the Volvo was going, and that was with a bench seat. And if what had happened in the Volvo had happened in my station wagon, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. So, it's like what you said, you didn't run a trans shield because it wasn't required. That doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't run a trans shield.
Right.
It's, you got to take the safety stuff seriously. And just because I don't need that until I go nines, it's you got to think about what's your life worth and what's your quality of life worth. And I just, heard you say that. It made me think of our situation. Yeah. So,
well, I totally agree. And I think the best thing that we can do as experienced drag racers is let the next generation know about the safety from firsthand experiences of what we went through. We were lucky enough that we didn't die from our scenarios, so we might as well tell the next people, in line, or people watching this, or some guy who's wanting to build a car, that don't forget there's a responsibility to yourself and to your family to make sure what you're doing is safe.
Complete coincidence. I get this message from Coke today. That's the whole message right there. My
Yep.
belts are in date. Just got new ones.
Yep.
I mean, I'll say one thing, and I know some people won't like me saying this, but if you can afford a $20,000 engine, I don't want to hear that you can't afford a $5,000 roll cage. I mean, you're clearly your priorities are just wrong. If that's what you're telling me.
Yeah.
A car that runs 590 and you don't have a cage in it, that's ridiculous. So I just don't make any apology for that. I'm great that somebody took something that was never supposed to be able to run that fast and did it. Great, man. Cool. That's awesome. But to me, you should just go the opposite direction. You should start with making a car safe enough for the speed you want to run, then challenge yourself to run fast enough to need all that stuff.
Right.
That's my thought anyway.
I like that.
So you made a 650 cage. You're like, yeah. So guys in the chat, I saw a couple of tech questions float through. I will say this. I'll get the tech questions to the Nelsons or to Mr. Coe. If you would, just email them to me because tonight is not about tech questions. We do have one here that is related to safety for May Cove. I'll pop it up and then we'll move on. He's asking, with an 18 spline 4-speed SFI clutch and flywheel, is there anything else you would add?
To the car itself, we'll definitely drive shaft loop, and anything with popping clutches or letting go of the trans brake. This is also something that happened to me when in the same car in the Coronet. I was running 980s and on half-inch studs on the differential off the axles, and I let go of the brake at Route 66, and I completely cleaned off those half-inch studs, and the wheel came off. Well, luckily, I wasn't going very fast. I stopped it, but it kind of did some damage to the car. So now everything I have has got 5/8 studs. When I put Mr. Haney together, the minute I knew I was putting a trans brake in it, the first thing I did when I put axles and a spool in it is I bought the 5/8 studs. For a truck that only runs like mid-11s, I got top fuel, studs on it. I'll never break them, but they'll be there if I ever do get the truck to run faster than 11s.
But you'll never have to worry about it.
No, I won't. I will never break another stud again as long as I live. That was probably more embarrassment than anything, because it happened at it was called the Chrysler Classic, and it was at Route 66, and it was embarrassing. Not only that, when they tried to get me off the track, I had all my fuel pumps and fuel filters hanging off the back of the car, and I had fiberglass back bumper. It was almost impossible to tow that thing off the track. We had to build up with wood between the chains and the lift, and then we had to get it on my trailer. So, I mean, if you got to buy studs, and if you think you're going to have a trans brake or a stick shift like that gentleman has, get 5/8 studs right off the get-go.
So something else you mentioned, drive shaft loops. I actually see more failures of drive shafts in cars that aren't as fast because they've upgraded to power before they've upgraded to U-joints, drive shaft materials, etc. So the drive shaft loop is not something to put in when you get to a certain speed. It's a good idea to do it right now.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Yep.
We have another guest to bring in, and I'll go ahead and add him to the stream. And we'll have some time at the end just if you have any general questions, any of these folks. But this is Blake, Bad Attitude C10, a no-name 500 contender this year who crossed the 500 sub line and punched his ticket, got busy early and made it happen. And I'm glad you're joining us, Blake.
Hey, thanks, and hi, everybody. And I was proud to be introduced to both Calvin and his dad the morning of the wreck. That's the first time I ever met him live in person was at sick week the day of the wreck. And I was like, wow. I was on the phone with John that afternoon because we had no information. And I was begging for any information he could share. So we're now going from the Andrew Nelson's wreck at a racetrack, Mr. Coates incident on the street. And we're going to move some things that happened to me, not at either location, but in my shop, at my house. And a little bit of background information on me. I actually got into street racing at the age of 15. That quickly went to a track after I became a volunteer fire department with the local organization because my best friend's house burnt down. Long story short, I was basically a certified firefighter, an instructor in the state of Texas for firefighting for over 18 years. I became a bottle boy. I ran nitrous religiously in my race cars when I moved to the track. Had a big background with running scuba tanks, SCBAs on my back. We even played paintball, so we had CO2 canisters in my house. You name it, bottle-related items are everywhere. So that leads us into this. I purchased a car off of a website called racingjunk.com. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it or not. The owner of the car sold it to me turnkey. I went and picked it up. We got it to the shop. We tore it apart. It had what appeared to be a brand new NOS cheater system on the car. The bottle was in plastic straps behind the passenger seat and the floorboard. It had an electric bottle heater on it. My first red flag should have been when we were taking the system off the car. I realized that the Yahoo that built the car put an electric bottle heater on it, but did not put any type of a pressure sending unit to maintain when that heater came on or shut off. And he had it directly to the battery, not even going through the emergency cutoff switch. So the guy said he had the car for 11 years. The bottle, after the fact of it actually getting me, and we'll get into that in a minute, was 7 years out of date. So it was out of certification for 7 years. And when I took it out of the car, I was transitioning from running nitrous to running alcohol injected motors, and I was getting geared to start running blown alcohol injected motors. I wanted to go faster than what I was. It's like a drug, everybody knows. I weighed the bottle, had 4.5 pounds in it, stuck it under a workbench. The extra jets that went to the plate were in a plastic Ziploc bag that were zip tied to the bottle valve. Other than that, the plate itself, the solenoids, it even had a purge setup on it. Everything basically looked brand new. So I guess basically you can just say I threw it under a workbench. I was like, somebody down the road might have a use for it. I live in Texas, so right off the bat, since I knew I was never going to run that bottle in the future, had no intent to do that. The red flag that first went up was the power could have been left on this bottle so many times to heat up, and we didn't know how many cycles it's been hot, how much it expanded, contracted. Had no history of the bottle as far as its last registration or recertification or anything, because I didn't even look at it because it was out of sight, out of mind. I just put it on there. I should have drained it before I put it on the workbench. 11 months later, I had a friend call me up, and he told me that he had a guy that worked with him that needed a transmission rebuilt for his car, or he was going to lose his job that Monday. So I went to the shop. It was on July 24th of 2009. It was 116 degrees. So the shop was a galvanized tin building on a wood frame, had one 16-foot entry door, one back door, and 3 windows. So needless to say, when I went in there, it was freaking hot. So they showed up, we tore transmission apart. The friend that brought it over there told them I didn't have parts to fix it. Wasn't what they said it was. It's 200 metric. He picked the nitrous bottle up and said, hey, what is this? And I said, dude, that's out of the Skittle car. If you want it, take it with you. You can have it. We'll work out a deal later, whatever. And he's like, well, and I said, no, it has 4.5 pounds in it. He literally had this bottle next to his head, and this guy had 4 kids, and he was on his second marriage, so he also had 3 stepkids. So he's the dad of a big breed. And I went around the corner putting tools up, and there was a Camaro in the bay between it and the bench, and the bottle was left in the aisle. And at this time, I had a 4-year-old kid that would fly in my shop on her bicycle. So I picked the bottle up by the valve. I scooted it back under the workbench, set it on the concrete floor, made sure the valve was shut off like you always do. I took 3 steps away from it. My girlfriend yells at me. I turn around. everything went black. Shake the cobwebs off. I'm like, what the hell just happened? Tried to stand up, and I fell right back down, and I realized I'm kind of like missing my left foot. So by this time, I'm like panicking. So I'm saying, hey, I need a towel and I need a strap. And brought me the towel. I shoved the towel into my leg. I put a tourniquet on my calf. Couldn't control the bleeding. Started to panic a little more, so I put a strap in my knee, and I tied it up as tight as I could to get the blood to stop. The aftermath was me traveling to a hospital. And once I got to this hospital, I went to sleep. I don't really remember anything after that point for 3 days. And then I had people coming in visiting, and they were bringing pictures of a bottle and saying, dude, this is the bottle that blew up in your shop. And I had no clue what they were talking about. And it kind of scared me. So I started asking questions. And I'm trying to share this. Bear with me, because Tony just taught me how to share files and stuff yesterday, and it's not wanting to work. John, you might have to hook me up.
I'm going to pull that up right now. Actually, that's what I was doing.
Oh, did it show up on your side?
I have one right here. Here is.
Yep. Okay. So that's the actual bottle that blew up in my shop. And mind you, it had 4.5 pounds of nitrous in it when we weighed it when it came out of the car. There is still a 3,000 psi burst disc in that valve. So what a lot of these people started saying right off the bat on Yellow Bullet and other forums were, oh, they were heating the bottle up, they were misusing the bottle, they were filling this bottle up with nitrogen. I don't have a fill station. I do not have mother bottles at my shop. Nitrous Dave, the owner of Nitrous Outlet, his name's Dave Vassar. Anytime I've ran nitrous, he's the man who has filled my bottles. Whenever he learned about everything that was being said about my accident, he started trying to nip it in the bud, and that's when we started trying to figure out a plan while I'm leaning in a hospital room for 6 weeks, had 13 operations, an above-the-knee amputation on my left leg, and I don't know if y'all can see, my wrist, it severed my ulnar nerve, so these 3 fingers kind of follow each other. And they said I'd never be able to use my hand again, but I can use it. I can shake your hand, hold cups, whatever it may be. So DOT approached us and asked to take the bottle. We let them take the bottle. They told us that I would get the bottle back once there was a conclusion on what caused all the actual microfractures and cracks on the internal structure of the bottle. When I got to talking to him, he said after the second week, they found 1,100 microfractures on the internal substance of the bottle or structure of the bottle. 300 of them could be seen with the naked eye. And I was like, what caused it? He said, we're going to have to do further testing. I said, well, by this time I've had friends approach me and say, hey, get some of the bottle back, send it to a metal urgent. They can tell you everything you need to know. So we started calling. And after about 3 years, I gave up trying to call DOT to find out anything about the bottle. Dave Vassar then approached me and asked about starting something to try to remove old, outdated bottles, or even if it's a new bottle that comes into your hands out of a car that's still under certification, but you don't know the history of the bottle. And we started what's called the bottle exchange program. And you can actually trade in any 10 or 15 pound bottle and automatically get $100 off the purchase of a brand new bottle. And since this has started, we basically had over 1,000 people take advantage of this. So we can't really say, hey, we have saved somebody else from ending up in the predicament that I'm in now, which is still in a wheelchair. But we can say that we know out of a bunch of the bottles that have been turned in, one of which I took and had hydrostatically tested yesterday. And after this live, we're going to share part of that on Tony's live for anybody that wants to join. That's if I can figure out how to share these pictures, because it's not working right now on John's.
I'll plug that real quick. What we're doing here is just a preamble to it. If you want to get more in the weeds about this nitrous bottle thing, all of this, Tony's Hot Rod Garage goes live after this one. I just want to put that out there for all of you if you want to follow along. That's why we have Blake on last. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So what I was going to try to do is in Tony's lab, we're going to share, and I'll show y'all how to read the date codes on the bottles. I have some pictures of some failed bottles that actually were in cars, one of which had an electric bottle heater on it. They didn't have a pressure switch on it. Directly fired up to the battery. It blew up in their garage. The whole back end of the car is gone. Have another one that they actually tampered with the burst disc and put a plug in it. And it blew the whole back end off this four-door car.
Gosh.
And the crazy thing about it is we're not going to start doing nitrous 101 like John says. We're just trying to talk about preventive measures. The thing is, if you want to go faster with nitrous, it's not about the pressure guy. Buy bigger solenoids and put bigger pills in it. That's why they make them adjustable. You know, and I used to go round and round with people at the racetrack. We'd get there, they'd pit next to us. We'd see them grab propane torches out. And I'm like, y'all need to move because you're not doing that around me at all. And
by the way, you can get thrown out of the No Name Nationals for propane torches on nitrous bottles. We mentioned that last year, and we mean it.
And that's good to know. And because what a lot of people don't understand, I'm sure the Nelsons should know this name, Mike Thermos. This is the guy that actually brought NOS into the automotive industry. He actually was the I guess you could say, owner of NOS. They're the two people put it together in the late 70s. After my accident, right off the bat, Thermos contacted me. And I mean, we talked, and Dave Basher and him talked. And Thermos had already had brought to his attention for years people heating up bottles with torches. And they actually had somebody turn them into the government for watching a show on Pinks, where it was broadcasted on Pinks. A guy in the pits with a torch on a bottle. And the first thing these guys do, they call Mike Thermos. This is the guy that brought it in. He's the daddy of nitrous, you know. And he's like, these practices have to stop. In Tony's live, I'll share the link to the article about Thermos talking about this. And you're going to have people that watch the Street Outlaws. Anything that these guys are doing just because they see it on TV, you have people that are getting into racing now that are uneducated, have no clue what's safe, what's not. And a lot of guys want to take shortcuts. And guys, when it comes to safety, it's not just what you do for yourself, but if you're buying a car that's turnkey or you're buying a car somebody else built, go over that stuff with a fine tooth comb. Because if I would have been thinking normally, I would have looked at that bottle before I ever took it to have it filled to make sure it was within certification date. If it wasn't, I would have drained it and I would have just discarded it, because I would rather go buy a brand new bottle at that time for $119 than pay $28 to have it recertified, because I just had the mindset that, hey, it's new, it's going to be safer anyway. And I knew the history of that bottle now instead of not knowing who had it prior to me. Thermos, before he sold NOS to Holly and started Nitrous Supply, Dave Baxter, Nitrous Works was still in business at this time. All these companies actually started really hammering down on bottles that show signs of being heated, whether it be a torch, it has blemish marks, the label is not readable or anything. DOT implemented a visual inspection. So you guys that are powder coating bottles and stuff nowadays, if you're filling your bottles at home or you're going somewhere that they really don't care, if you go to a reputable nitrous company to fill your bottles, if you painted it, the label's not legible, you re-powder coated it, they're never going to fill it for you anymore, because they don't want to be liable for somebody else mistreating stuff at all. And I'm the same way. If I would have looked at the bottle, saw it was out of certification, drained it before I stuck it under the workbench, my accident never would have happened. But the things that led up to it, kind of like Mr. Cope said, and Andrew Nelson kind of rebirthed the same thing. It takes things to get in line, and you have the domino effect. You know, the bottle that came in the car that I bought, I judged a book by its cover instead of catching two red flags I should have caught. The thing that actually made the bottle the way it was whoever filled it last. Because whoever filled that bottle last, why did they fill a nitrous bottle that was 7 years out of certification? Never should have been filled. So it's just one of them things. I told John I would come on. I'm still in a wheelchair. I had other health issues that came on since then. Y'all were actually, I was going to compete in Sick Week in February, but the truck got delayed. And then I had some health issues. And then I joined and spoke with John about coming to y'all. And the No Name Nationals was going to be the first race I've attended in 14 years. So bad to say now, I had an emergency appendectomy 3 weeks ago, so I'm probably not going to make it with the truck, but I'm still wanting to come and spectate and meet as many of y'all as I can. So if y'all want to see hydrostatic testing process, how to read the date codes and some bottles that have blown up, I'll share all that with you on Tony's live, because Tony can walk me through what I'm doing wrong, because it's not there now, and I don't know why. But so any questions, I guess, John?
So first of all, Tony messaged me. He'll be about 10 minutes late. I'm certainly not going to hold my gracious guests hostage any longer. They want to stay. They're welcome to stick around all they want to stay. But I'm going to hand off to Tony, so it might be 10, 15 minutes after, whatever. That said, just let people know. That said, what do the dates of certifications run on nitrous bottles? Because I don't know. I've never played with the stuff.
On an aluminum bottle, the certifications are good for 5 years. And like I said, I can show y'all pictures and how to read the date codes. If you get a bottle that's in a car that's used or something, you can find the born on date. Usually we'll also have in between the dates, which you're going to have 2 digits for the month, the manufacturer mark, and then you're going to have the 2-year digit. So if it's been recertified, you're then actually going to find another number that's going to have a 2-day, month, and then in the middle, there's going to be 4 digits. And it's called a RIN number. So it's a recertification identification number, because anytime the bottles are hydrostatically tested, the serial number is taken down. You show what pressures you tested at. You do, for instance, the aluminum bottles, they're 10 pounds, 15 pounds, and so on. Every 5 years they test. As long as they pass, the hydrostatic testing and the visual inspection, you can keep going. The carbon wrap fiber bottles that are out now, they're good, depending on the permit number, for 3 or 5 years. So you have to read the permit number, and when they take them into hydrostatically test them, they can tell you how much date time you have. But after 15 years, if you don't apply to have an extension on that carbon fiber wrap bottle, they'll remove them from service. They'll X out the serial number and condemn it, turn it into the DOT, and you can take your bottle home, but whenever you take it to get it refilled, all the numbers in the serial number will have X's stamped over them, and nobody will touch them. Now, you might get a buddy to refill it or something, but again, that would be a very unsafe practice. So you might get a bottle. We had one turned in the program through Nitrous Outlet that was from 1971, was the original date code on the bottle. It was re-inspected or recertified after 5 years of that. Its next inspection was in 97. So somebody ran that bottle for that many years and never had it hydrostatically tested. And, after that, nothing again. I wanted to get that bottle and cut it open yesterday and test it. But Dave said it was more of a momentum because it came from a company that's no longer even around. It's called like 10,000 RPM or something like that. I've never heard of it. And so it's kind of unique.
How many fractures?
Dale Armstrong's old company.
Blake, how many fractures were in the bottle that you had? You said the one.
They said that the actual hairline cracks you could visually see, there were 300, and then they did what was called it's called a visual eddy test, which is actually an electromagnetic test that they shoot waves out. And they said it fired off. It said there were over 1,100 microfractures on the internal structure of the bottle.
And it was one of them that caused the failure. One. Well, the other 1,100 didn't fail. It was
here's all I can tell you. I'm not one to speculate. I'm not going to assume anything. I'll give you a guesstimate of what I think happened, but I'm telling you straight up, it's not based on facts. It's an assumption. But I'm not going to spread anything. And I lost friends for the same reason. Because I had friends saying, dude, you're selling everything you own to pay your medical bills. You lost your race car. You lost your trailer. All you got to do is tell one of these companies you're going to sue them because you lost your leg to their product. And I'm like, I'm not going to point the finger at somebody that's not at fault. So we don't know if it's a bottle manufacturer at fault. We don't know if the person that had the bottle before me heated it with a torch or it was just abused with an electric heater. We don't know. Who filled it last? We don't know. The bottle could have just been a bad bottle from the get-go. So I basically wouldn't point the finger at NOS and say, hey, your bottle took my leg, give me money or hush money, because I have more integrity than that, and I love the sport of racing. And all that would do is put a black eye on racing. So what I wanted to do was to try to figure out a way that I didn't have to worry about somebody else coming across that ticking time bomb like I did. And the positive from it is I'm still here. Dave Baxter did stand up and he created the, trade-in program. So if we have saved one other person or even somebody's car, from an exploding bottle because it was misused, kudos to Dave, because he's the only person that stood up and did anything when this first happened. We continued to call DOT for 7 years total, trying to get the bottle back. And after the 3rd year, it was crickets. Anybody I talked to actually like, we don't even know who you are. So it's one of those deals. Was Wayne Chaney with DOT the guy that gave me a business card that we let take my bottle even really with DOT? We don't know. So instead of sitting here and, beating a dead horse, I just move forward. And that's why I think when I first talked to John, I said, dude, when I had my accident, I had people on Yellow Bullet. I had people on forums that Nitrous Outlet was a promotional sponsor for. And they were crucifying me up and down because you have keyboard warriors and people that want to spread their assumptions or speculations and want to be so right that they don't want to follow and try to find out what caused it and how to fix it. And that's still what I wish I could find out today. But without the bottle and us being able to have it sent to a metal urgent or something like that, I cannot honestly tell you what happened. So here's my guess or my assumption. I feel like now that I know that there were that many, fractures in the bottle, it had probably heated up and expanded so much and became weaker that I will tell this one part that I actually didn't say because I wasn't going to elaborate too much on all of this. When I put the bottle back under the table or workbench, any of y'all that do any type of welding, have oxyacetylene rigs, or have moved any type of bottle, whether it's CO2, nitrous, or whatever, if you set a bottle down on concrete and you ever hear that little chime and it's resonating, it's actually sending sound waves up the body and the internal structure of the bottle, So if I already had a spot or a weak point in the bottle, which if you look at the bottle I shared with John, and I got 3 more pictures of bottles that didn't completely come apart like mine, but a lot of people also don't understand later manufactured nitrous bottles. There's some companies that are going to bottles that are marked non-shat, and that means they're a non-shattered bottle, so their construction will keep them more intact. So I have 3 bottles that I can show you pictures of like mine that actually you can see how they stayed in more tack instead of like that. So I had the largest portion of the bottles, what took my mid-calf area out on my left leg. The bottle valve is what went through my wrist. That's why I had to have all the skin grafts and everything on my wrist. The shop was a 35 by 60 building with the partition, 35 foot this way. We basically could hold 5 race cars in the side that the bottle blew up in. It was under a bench. I had a Camaro race car right next to it, and about a 3-foot aisle, an empty bay. The table we had the transmission torn apart on, Chris was over there, so 2 bays away, and a car between him and the bottle. And he said it felt like a grown man aggressively picked him up and threw him into the wall. My girlfriend was in the front door of the shop, 15 foot away, and it threw her in the yard. I mean, she was just knocked out of the shop. Tools off the table and everything else, they said, were in the back of the pickup, went through the window. The back door blew off. All the windows were gone. And they said the roof was raised up 3 inches. The nails were sticking up 3 inches above the tent. And my best friend at the time,
hearing? I'm sure you're hearing.
It jacked this left arm up and it took my left leg, right? My right eardrum is shot. And I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. And I kept telling them, hey, I have a ringing in my ear. I have a ringing in my ear. And if I have 2 people talking at once, this and over here, everything sounds like Charlie Brown. So I was like, wah, wah, wah. And I told them something was wrong with it. And until I got discharged from the hospital and went and saw my primary care physician, that's when they finally looked at my ear. And they're like, oh, your eardrum ruptured. It's got scar tissue all over it. And I'm like, so how do we fix it? And they're like, it'll be what it is for now unless you want to get a hearing aid. So this ear, when I'm driving a car, if somebody's talking to me next to me, my girlfriend used to get pissed off because it's like I just like this. Can't hear a thing out of it. So Charlie Brown hearing out of the right ear and the left side of my body got jacked. Part of the bottle did cut my right leg too. So I also had a skin graft above my ankle, mid-calf on my right leg, but I can use it. And the bad thing is I had torn my right leg up and they were wanting to do a knee replacement, but I was too young because it's bone to bone. So at first I'm laying there in my bed in the hospital, like, why did I lose my good leg? You know, I lost my good leg. I got a bad leg. Well, guys, I'm a racer. I got a gas pedal foot still. So, you know, that's how I cope with that. So, yeah, it's kind of different. So, sorry, John, I ramble.
No, it's just an interesting one to me. I appreciate you telling the story. I told you, and this is just something that Blake and I were talking about months and months ago, is I said, we definitely don't want something like this to be what you're known for or anything like that. And we've never talked about it, you know, on the live here before. But I figured that this will be a good opportunity to talk about it, talk about what got learned and that kind of thing. And it will be helpful to somebody in our community to not have something like this happen. And I appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah, no problem. And I do have links that I can share with Tony's that I meant to share here with John on his live. Drag Illustrated did pick up after they did investigation, and they attended several events at different tracks around me in Texas and into Oklahoma to verify that, you know, who I was and everything was legit. It's not just some naysay story. And there's been three articles about me in Drag Illustrated that pretty much let you know what happened, the steps that we did take to try to get me back to walking and everything that had failed and stuff like that. But my main thing is, if you are a nitrous guy, you do have any questions, I don't know it all, but I can give you anything that I can in Tony's live. We're going to give a few things away. The bottles are actually cut up. I actually had a picture I was going to share. So some of the bottles now end up like this. So they actually cut the crown off of the bottle, and then they are actually sent out. So if you can see, that's actually how thick an aluminum bottle is. So they're actually turned into trash cans now. So tonight on Tony's Live, I'm going to give one of these away. So if you're in Tony's chat and you are a subscriber to Tony or Tony and my channel both, anybody that's in chat that's attending, we're going to do a drawing and we're going to give one of those away. I know everybody doesn't run nitrous and might not like nitrous stuff, so we're going to get some other stuff away too. But we also have, I don't know if y'all will make that out, but it's a nitrous outlet fender cover. I'll do some fuel fragrance, some hats, and some shirts, and Tony's probably got some stuff up his sleeve too. So
cool.
Anybody that's interested in that, just join us. Okay, sorry, John.
And Tony's running a few minutes late. He's going to message me when he gets back. It'll probably be about 10 minutes later. So that said, I want to put this comment up, and then we'll segue into just any questions that we have from the chat. I did not realize this. Our friend Mike Wedge, Dick Dastardly, Rich here, said he spent 4 days in intensive care. He tried to weld a cracked wheel, and it had patch of flat in it. I guess it's like slime or something like that. And apparently it was really flammable. Says he has a glass eye now. It was a big bomb. Man.
Wow. That's crazy.
But this stuff happens to people we know. And so I figured it's worth at least sharing these stories to remind us all this is why we want to make our cars safe as we can. But anyway, if the chat has any questions for any of these guys, now's a good time to ask. We got a few minutes left. Anything specific that you want to ask about safety, car construction, billet drums, bolt-in sprags, bottle exchange program, now is the time to ask.
Blake, what does a new bottle cost?
Depending on where you buy it, here's the bad thing. I was actually, me and Nitrous Dave have been going back and forth all this week. The week I need him the most to get a bunch of this pertinent information, because the bottle exchange program, when we first initiated it, was $100 toward a 10-pound bottle and $125 toward a 15, and that's how it's always been up till now. That's what I was going to tell y'all tonight. Dave's like, no, it's just 100 straight across the board. And I'm like, well, I'm glad you finally got back to me. We were going to show y'all some information on how a water bath or a water heater would work too tonight in Tony's Live, but their website is being reconstructed, and parts of it are up for a minute, but then I was trying to download information and it disappeared. So until his site goes back live, I don't know what they're at the moment, because he said a lot of the prices were changing and stuff like that. Depending on the companies, I will tell you all this. I don't work for Nitrous Outlet anymore. I don't do that. I don't even run a bottle anymore. Kind of, yeah, that's not good for me. But they do have some of the safest and best flowing bottles that are out there. They have high flow valves on all their stuff. If you go and type under, I believe, see, I also have the picture of this, but I can't get to it. On their website, if you go to the exchange program, it has all the information for you, and it'll tell you what bottles with the part numbers you can use your $100 toward. And but I do not want to steer you wrong, so I'm not going to lie to you right now. But if you go to Nitrous Outlet, you can check it out and see what the bottles are. The other good thing about the program that Dave runs is they have a support trailer, and they go all over the United States and attend races. They bring extra bottles just for the exchange program. So if you're at a track and Dave and them are set up and they have their support trailer there, you got some bottles you want to trade in, you can take them over there and get your credit toward them right then and there.
That's cool.
So it's
That's
kind of
really cool. We got a question here, I believe, is directed to John Cope. Dr. Go, love that username, by the way. Dr. Go says, big thanks to all to help keep us safe. Is a stock A999, which is Chrysler Torque Flight transmission, okay as is without protection for 400 street horsepower?
It is. The 999 and 904s are not prone to exploding like the 727s. Because the drums are smaller and closer to the center line of the transmission. So they don't have all that weight going outside and around like 727s do. But for 400 horsepower, you probably shouldn't need anything. But if you take it to the track, the rule is any Chrysler with a slip, regardless of how fast it goes, has to have a shield or a blanket.
I'll add to that too. The 999s, at least the sprags are either rivet in or bolt in from the factory, depending on what year. And the drum is significantly lighter and smaller, so it's not as prone to what 727s have. Here's a good question.
John, do you mind seeing if this? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say there's a question I'm going to put up real quick from Dizzy Izzy, and then we'll get to you, Blake. I think this will be a good question for the Nelsons, but any of you with experience certainly welcome to opine. His question is on half car and full car belly pans. But Blake, go ahead. What do you have there first?
For me?
Yeah. What were you saying?
Oh, I think I might have figured this picture deal out. Could you see if this pops up on your side to show?
Sure.
You don't have to show it, just let me know.
Sure. Go ahead.
I think I finally got it to work.
John, did you just turn that over to us? I apologize.
Yeah, well, hang on just a second. Blake has got his screen share, then we'll get the belly pans with you guys.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
going to add this. I'm going to add this window.
All
We're
right,
going to
so
see
there
if
y'all
the
go.
screen share works.
All right, I figured it out. It said I wasn't logged into my Streamline or StreamYard account. That's why I couldn't share footage or videos.
There we go.
That is actually. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's the car, isn't it?
That is, well, I got 3 different cars that they actually have had bottles that were either in the trunk or in the back windows of them that were just left attended. And one of them, it's not this one. There's another one I can show you down the road that actually had an electric bottle heater that was left turned on, and it was in their garage. And they went in their house, and it blew up. It blew the back of the car off in the garage, in the garage on fire. So, I mean, it's not really spread heavily on the internet about nitrous bottle failures and explosions, but there's more out there than you could really think or realize. You got trailers that have people heating bottles up with propane torches and other stuff that have actually gone off and took sidewalls of trailers out and actually shot into stands and everything else. So
that brings
it's
up
kind of crazy.
That's a great point you're bringing up, because when something fails to track, everybody knows it. But when something happens like this in someone's shop, it might get completely swept under the rug and never talked about.
Yep. And for instance, I'll show you. Do you have time to show a few of these while we wait for Tony, or do you want to answer questions?
Go ahead. Go ahead,
All right,
and then we're going to get a question up from Nelson's.
All right.
You know what? While you're sorting through those, Blake, I'm going to go ahead and put that question up for the Nelsons. I think it's a good one.
That's cool.
Because they have run a belly pan before, and Dizzy's asking an opinion on half car and full car belly pans.
Well, what he's describing there is actually an aerodynamic item that you add to the car to help it have less drag. and more downforce. So there are certain classes that have half belly pans and other classes have full belly pans. When we talk about the engine pan, what we're talking about is something like this, where you actually have a device that gets bolted to the bottom of the car that captures any of the components that may come out of the engine if it fails, or catch the oil and that kind of thing. In addition to that, then you put these absorbent diapers in there, and you restrain them inside the pan to capture things. Above that, then there's also an engine diaper that goes around the oil pan that is designed to catch, it's ballistic proof, so it's designed to capture things as they come apart. So, Dizzy, you've got multiple things in this answer. The belly pans that are half car and full car are aerodynamic devices to help the car run faster. What we just showed there is a device that is there to capture debris should the engine fail. And then you also have to include these things, which catch the oil and help keep things off the track.
Excellent. And this is a follow-up to what John Cope had said. Tall Garage says, any Mopar with slicks needs a shield, ? Can you, and it's not, this is not a tech requirement, but please explain what you mean by that, John Cope.
Well, the 727s are so prone to explosion that it's been happening as the big block Chrysler progressed throughout the 90s. I'm not 100% sure, but I thought the rule was at most tracks, if it was a Mopar and had slicks, it had to have a shield, regardless of how fast or how slow it was. I know that was the rule at Route 66. Now, if that's an NHRA rule or what, I'm not 100% sure, but I've heard that multiple times.
That was a written rule for many years. I don't know if it's still there, but John, you're not mistaken. That was a
okay.
Okay, excellent. We got a few more slideshow pictures from Blake that we'll put up. I'm gonna add this to the stream.
Let him finish this.
All right, now y'all see that bottle right there. This bottle was actually in a car. I can show you the picture of that here in just a second. And
what does the age of the bottles have to do with them exploding like that? Is it an age?
Here's what you have to remember. It's not really the age. It's actually, well, I mean, any aluminum, you deal with aluminum every day with transmissions. When you deal with heat and aluminum, there's a process when it comes to metals that's called annealing. Annealing actually softens metal. Well, depending on what type of composition aluminum is made out of, it can start anywhere from 250 degrees, or it might start at 350 and go up to 550, or it might be 550 up to 750. But with these tanks, you have people that are actually overfilling them. Number one, if you're overfilling a bottle, nitrous bottles are made to basically operate between 900 and 950 PSI. You're going to have a lot of people that say, oh, we like running 1,000 or 1,100. But then you also have these same people complaining that, oh, my nitrous gun won't quit opening. It won't open, it's stuck. And it's kind of like you go look at their bottle pressure. They got 1,350 PSI bottle pressure. And it's like, quit hammering your valves in your solenoids and you won't be damaging them, and they'll work. So to have a full 10-pound bottle reach operating pressure, which is 900 to 950, 85 degrees Fahrenheit, you can achieve that easily. So you think about the valve, every time the bottles get filled through the valve, they get cold, they get hot, you got expansion, you got contraction. Bottles that over their lifetime are heated, every time it's heated, it changes. So if you get a bottle that has been misused and had a torch abuse it for 10 years of its life, I mean, you got to think, you're not evenly heating the bottle, number one. And if you got a Yahoo that's just sitting there and heating it up in one spot, it doesn't have to be an old bottle to fail. It could be a bottle that's been misused and heated up over and over and over, and it might be a year old, 6 months old, 32 years old. That's why they're basically like a ticking time bomb. But The 5-year certification thing is what is supposed to help eliminate any of this from happening, because they got a visual inspection, kind of like the bottle that we're going to show y'all we hydrostatically tested yesterday. It failed the visual test because it has been heated. You can see blemish in the powder coating, the label. Once we took the valve off and we checked the threads in the valve, there are cracks in the threads of the valve, and there are cracks in the crown of the bottle. So that bottle would have already been condemned and not even hydrostatically tested. But we went on ahead and tested it anyway because we just wanted to see if you had somebody that didn't pay attention to the visual aspects of the bottle, would it still pass? And believe it or not, we tested it and it passed. We cooled it down. We let it rest for over an hour. We tested it a second time, and it actually had a different expansion rate the second time, but it was still a positive expansion. And the expansion rate, you actually have a pressurized rate, and you don't mind that bigger. We used to want to watch them because you can see how big the bottle swelled. But then after it cools down, you test them at 3,000, well, depending on the bottle. The bottle has a working pressure, normally like if it's an 1,800-pound bottle, the way they describe it is you want to test it at 5/3 the rate of working pressure. So if it's an 1,800 PSI bottle, you test it at 3,000 PSI, which just so happens to be the same rate that your burst disc is. So the thing about them is the more these bottles get heated up, expand, contract, start breaking down, they think, well, if you got the burst disc, it's going to save your butt. If that's the fact, you wouldn't have bottles spelling in all walks, because same thing with O2 bottles on aircraft. I got a picture of one I'm going to show y'all that it was in service and it worked. And the hydrostatic test is below its, pressure level, and the bottle blew up during hydrostatic testing. But that bottle was also made in 1981. We got another bottle that's a carbon fiber bottle that was made in 2015, and it popped, and it wasn't even 6 years old. So it's not basically the age of the bottle that we're stressing. It's if you have a bottle that's been abused, or if you have a bottle that comes into your, ownership by way of a car, or your buddy gives it to you, you don't know the history of it. Instead of taking a chance on it, why not trade it in and get $100 off a new one? That way, at least you know what you're starting out with.
Andrew, go ahead. And Buff also has a question what alloy the bottles are. But Andrew, go ahead.
Well, there's also a reality. Somebody mentioned it earlier about metal fatigue. Most aluminums have a fatigue life. And what that means is you can put a stress on it that at no matter what level, it will fail under a certain number of cycles, where steel has a rate of decay. If you put stress versus number of cycles in a graph, it will decay to a certain point where no matter how many cycles you put on it, it will last. Aluminum never gets to that point where it will never fail. It always goes to zero. So that's where there's a certain assumption that it's going to see a number of stresses on it, and they have to pick a number to require the recertification, because you have to assume at some point it has had full pressure, reduced pressure, full pressure, reduced pressure, and that hoop stress creates a fatigue cycle on it that'll eventually lead to a failure. So that's two of the things that drive those decisions, is that aluminum always fails, and you have to pick a number and assume that it has seen so many cycles of stress.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy about the way DOT has their testing right now. And before they did the visual inspections, they basically just depended on the hydrostatic testing. So if it passed the hydrostatic testing, they put a stamp on it and let it go. So that's why some of these bottles, even if they have cracks in the internal structure and stuff that nobody ever caught or saw, they pass the inspection, they're put right back into circulation. So my whole thing is, if you get a bottle, whether it's 3 years old, 10 years old, or 42 years old, if you don't know how much it was used, how it was treated, whether it was abused or not, I personally would trade it in, or just not even get it and buy a new one. But again, that's just me, and it could be me being gun shy, because I was positively content with that bottle sitting in my shop. I didn't have any problem with it. I've had air packs on my back. I've had scuba tanks on my back. I ran nitrous for 23 years before I converted over. And I've never seen a bottle fail. Never heard of bottles failing or anything like that. Nowadays with the internet, you go do a Google search. You'll hear all things about bottles failing. And it's always the same thing. People saying, oh, the only reason it failed is because the blow-off disc was either blocked off, doubled up, or removed. They don't get into misuse of this bottle compromising the integrity of the bottle because it degraded the aluminum. And like Andrew just said, I mean, if they could put a 5-year, okay, the bottle is going to run out of, use in 10 years or 15 years, it would be great. But we don't know how often it's going to be filled up or who's going to be heating it or anything that can change the year. So DOT says if it passed 3,000 PSI inspection, it's good. Now, if it does look cracked or if it looks abused, they can fail it. So they're giving people that do inspections of nitrous bottles or any kind of bottle, carbon, like CO2 for your soft drinks, any bottle, scuba tanks, SCBAs for fire departments. If the bottle does not pass the visual inspection, they can fill it, condemn it, and it's done. But hydrostatically testing is what the nitrous industry still relies on heavily.
And
me, when I saw the bottle, go ahead.
I've actually been to school for hydro testing, and that is singularly the best way to prove out the integrity of a bottle. Obviously, you don't know what that past history is. The visual inspection is very important because any metal loss or anything like that creates a stress concentration that in your hoop will cause it to crack there and fail. But singularly, a hydro test is the best way to ensure that the bottle does have integrity.
Yeah, and it's actually a pretty cool test to watch because the thing that a lot of people don't also get is like nitrous bottles, for instance, the burst disc is rated at 3,000 PSI. Just because it's rated at 3,000, it can still pop at 27, 28, 29. There's no telling. But when the bottle is hydrostatically tested at the same pressure, which is 3,000 PSI, and it's in water, which Andrew said he's been to, he's seen hydrostatic testing. When the bottles fell in a hydro test, they don't just come apart. They're not as a violent explosion because they're contained with water. So whenever these bottles fail, a lot of the time, whenever you take them out, they're just going to have like a straight seam line crack look, or they might be at an angle. So that's why we were going to share those pictures, which I will share in Tony's, because I was wanting some of y'all to see, because these guys that are running around telling y'all that if the bottle's not abused, it's never going to fail. That's not a fact. Aluminum is aluminum, and it's not. There is no shelf life, I guess is the best way to put it, because we don't know how it's going to be treated. Just like your tires, you put a brand new tire on your car and they say it's good for 40,000 miles. I've never had a tire get 40,000 miles that I drive on because I don't drive like that. But I'm just saying, they give you a roundabout figure. Your nitrous. Andrew Nelson, do y'all run nitrous very much at all?
I used to run a lot of it back when I was younger. I still have some systems here. We're probably going to put some onto a car in the next year.
Yeah. So when you were younger, how most of the guys are like, hey, I'm running a 200 shot on my car, so I got 400 horsepower plus this 200. The rating on them, yourself, isn't a given. It depends on your tune-up, the application it's going to, the car, the cam. A lot of variables are there, but they give you a roundabout number to get you in the ballpark. Just like when you deal in Mr. Cope's world. You got yahoos that show off-the-shelf converters, and they tell you, hey, it might be a 2400 to a 28, and there's a reason for that, because depending on the torque you're putting out, correct, is going to dictate what it's doing. But they don't give you a set thing. But I bet if you go to Mr. Cope, give him all the information on your car and say, I want a 3200 converter, and he takes your information, he'll build you a converter for your car that'll be a 3200 converter. It's not going to be a this or that. It's going to be what you need. So that's the other thing that people don't understand. My uncle's heated bottles for 25 years. It's never blown up, so it's not going to do it to me. It only takes one time. And did you plan on wrecking that day, Mr. Nelson? You know what I mean? It happens. And the good thing is Cope's here, Andrew's here, and I'm still here. And for what reason, I have no clue other than to race again in the future. But I'll shut up now again. Sorry.
Hey, I do have a question, and I think this is a good one for John Cope, because we mentioned, because he and I are both unapologetic Mopar guys, but that drum explosion from a transmission is not unique to a torque flight. There are other transmissions that can have a drum explode too. So the TH400 is one, namely. But tell people a little bit about that, because there's a lot of guys that run that transmission.
Yeah, turbo 400s. If you run high horsepower in there, their direct drums will explode. But usually it happens on mid track or in the big end of the track. And if you have tire shake with a turbo 400, they say that you should scrap the pass. But if you drive through it or get out of it, get back into it, that's when those turbo 400s explode. So anything with a Simpson gear set can do with it too. That's large enough. A 904 is very small. A C4 is very small. But a C6, a turbo 350, a 727, then you have your sister overdrive transmissions, which would be 46RE, 700 R4s, and the E4ODs could also have that potential too.
John, you would probably know better than anybody, but I think the biggest risk on a turbo 400 is the RPM, because the thing has to either completely stop or reverse rotation. If you're spinning them above 7,000 RPMs, that's where the big risk comes in. And it's kind of one of those unwritten rules that if you're going to spin the engine that high, you've always got to replace those drums on a 400.
Okay, I would definitely accept that. I am not the actual perfect expert. I only hear what other transmission guys talk about. And one of them is having tire shake on the big end. I don't know. I mean, I don't want a transmission explosion at all. Torque flights explode on the starting line, and turbo 400s explode on the big end or mid track. Either way, an explosion is an explosion.
Yeah, we've gone to aluminum drums because of the inertia and all that. You know, we've got engines we're turning 8,000 RPMs, and because you have to, again, I can't remember if it's stop it or reverse the rotation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got a tremendous amount of energy, one, in inertial forces, but then two, to stop the rotation. That is a big issue. So 7,000 is the go-by number on turbo 400s, and somebody's making a comment 7,500 on the 4L80 drum. They're is
the 4L80? We're just
I can't answer that.
We're just getting into the 4L80 stuff.
We got 3 of them tore apart behind us.
Hey, big block 402.
You guys, can I ask you a question on your 400s?
Yes, sir.
You guys still run the intermediate Sprag, or do you run what's called the Spragless 400s?
One is Spragless, and the others all have it.
Okay. Because when you go to a Spragless 400, there's some timing issues. You actually turn it into a band or a clutch on, clutch off, where you have to shut off the intermediates to get the third gear shift, correct?
Can't answer that. That transmission that we have is actually in one of our cars now, and we're hoping to take it testing in the next within the next week. So I could ask and get back to you, but I do not know.
Well, I that would be a great question. But I believe, if I'm correct, that if you run Spragless 400s, because how a 400 works is it's kind of like a Lincoln. You turn on the forward clutch, the second gear clutch, and the third gear clutch. It turns on clutches as you go down the track, which makes it good for competition because you never have to shut nothing off. But when you go to a Spragless 400, basically what it is, it's locked up. So you have your forward clutch, second gear, the intermediate clutch comes on, and then normally it would stay on through third, and then the Sprag would come into effect. But with the Spragless, you have to shut off the intermediates to turn on third gear. So the only thing a little advice to you is make sure that the gear change between second to third is clean.
Yep.
And they have a way to time that. I'm not sure how they do it, if it's with jets or some way to time the band overlap issue that can come to having a spragless 400.
Yep.
Do you happen to know the diameter on a 727 drum?
I would have to say it's about an inch bigger than a Turbo 400.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, maybe inch and a half bigger than a Turbo 400.
Yeah, we have a 4L80 apart. I'd be curious what diameter compares, but
yeah, it is the diameter of it that issues. But if you ever cut one of those drums in half, it's filled with little air pockets everywhere. Those drums are designed. I mean, they made millions. I mean, literally millions of those transmissions over the years. So they were engineered to make a lot of them quick to serve a purpose. In the stock application, I don't think it was ever an issue. Same with the Turbo 400. I don't know anybody that had a stock Chevy truck that they used the tow stuff that would blow up a 400. But the minute you put some horsepower to it and you're pushing the limits of what it was originally designed to, is when you have issues.
Yeah, Turbo 400, all the stock parts, you're good up to about 850 horsepower.
Yeah.
After that, you've got certain parts like the input shaft and all those components that you need to replace. But somebody's asking about the aluminum drum. That is dependent upon your speed, the engine speed, because again, the sudden stop and reverse rotation and that kind of thing. So the heat cycles on the transmission drum, I don't know, but I would expect it to have a certain life cycle that we would find that break and we would have to throw it away. So
I've seen testing on both aluminum drums and steel drums for a torque flight. And when they're done on a spin test, the billet steel drum's far superior than a billet aluminum drum. I've seen piles of billet aluminum come apart on the spin test compared to the what happens to the steel drum. It just warps. It's like, it warps pretty bad. So if you have a Turbo 400 though, you do not have bands going around the drums. So it wouldn't matter if the drums were, aluminum or not, but in a torque flight, the band goes around the drum. So when you go to aluminum, every time you shift it into second gear, all that band does is wear the drum out. And then that aluminum material and the very light dusting gets throughout the fluid and everything. So it becomes a maintenance issue where you have to change the fluid in the filter every 25 to 30 passes. But with the 400, you don't have to worry about that because there are no bands going around the drum at the same time. So in the Turbo 400 world, that's great. You can be able to run aluminum. But in 727 world, I usually always try to push steel drums so you don't have that wearing of the aluminum.
Yep.
I'm putting up some random just chat messages down here at the bottom. And Tony is just about ready to go live. So I'm going to share one more picture since Blake's got it down here. And then after that, we'll give plug a couple of things we need to and move over. What do we have here, Blake?
All right, guys. So the blue bottle that I showed y'all a minute ago that looked like a kind of banana peeled open, once it was inspected and looked at, if you look at the picture, I pointed an arrow to it. That little plug is not supposed to be there. That's actually where your 3,000 PSI burst disc goes. And these people took it upon themselves to put it on there so they could build more bottle pressure was their reasoning behind this. And the repercussions were the bottle failed. So, and I tried to find pictures of this and get in touch with these people to find out the date codes of the bottle to try to find out even how old the bottle was just because I was curious. But we can't find out anything from them. So that right there, I was going to share on Tony's live too. But if you ever come across a bottle that's in a car that you buy or somebody sells you one on Facebook Marketplace, and it does not have the burst disc or a cap that has a blow off, or you put a bit tube to get the pressure out of your trunk if it's in the trunk or however it may be, get the plug out of it. Don't leave it in there. Definitely do not fill it with the plug in it, because that is 100% going to ruin the bottle. It might not be the first time, it might not be the second, but I would hate to be the person that was standing next to it when it gave way.
Hey guys, we're gonna wrap up here. I want to thank all of you for being on tonight and sharing your stories. I really hope that it made a difference for someone in our chat. And who knows? Maybe there's an accident that's not going to happen because what you guys have got everybody thinking about. So I want to thank you all for coming on and sharing your stories. Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate the chat. I will tell you that September 8th, we're going to have a live with our burnout competition, guys. I want to remind you, if you've not yet registered, No Name Nationals comes up in 27 days. And if you have any specific type tech questions, we weren't doing tech tonight, just safety-related tech, feel free to email them to me, and I'll get them to whomever on the panel you need. Or unless you don't, if you have their emails, by all means, send them to them. But if you don't, you can send them to me, and I'll get it to whomever. But for now, Tony goes live anytime now. And I will see you guys over there. Thanks for joining us.